4:17 p.m. Tuesday. A Korean noodle shop on Halsted Street, Chicago. November had turned the afternoon light flat and gray against the front windows. Inside, one thing never changed. The chair across from Kang Dae-hyun was always empty. People in this neighborhood had been leaving that chair empty for years. Not because anyone told them to, but because some understandings don't require words. The door opened. A boy, 7 years old, backpack on both shoulders, face carrying a stillness that didn't belong at his age. He walked to the corner table without hesitating, climbed into the empty chair, reached into his pocket and placed one chess piece on the table between them. The king, just the king, standing alone. "They fired my mom today," he said. You told me if something happened, I could come find you." The steam rising from the bowl of broth went still. The clock above the register ticked once. Then the room shifted in the way rooms do when something irreversible has just begun. Tae-hyun set his chopsticks down. He looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he looked at the door. "If this opening stopped you, stay with me." The story behind that boy, that empty chair, and the man no one in this neighborhood dares sit across from. It's one you won't forget. Drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you, and what time is it? I read every single one. Subscribe if you haven't. This is the channel for stories that actually mean something. Her name was Amara Bennett, 33 years old, daughter of Lorraine Bennett, who spent 22 years selling soul food from a push cart at the corner of 43rd and Cottage Grove in Bronzeville. No storefront, no loan, no marketing, just a cart and recipes that made strangers stop mid-stride and turn back. Lorraine lit the fire under her pot at 5:31 every morning without measuring a single thing. Amara stood beside her at age 7 and watched. She did not understand then that she was being taught the only lesson that would ever truly matter. You feed people from what is real, and you build only what is meant to last. Marrow and Oak Hospitality carried both names. Marrow for what sustains from the inside, the part most people never sees. Oak for what grows slow and holds. Together they spelled the first letters of Maria and Lorraine, her grandmother, her mother. Not a brand, a debt she intended to honor. The first location opened in a former laundromat on Blue Island Avenue in Pilsen. 312 square feet, 11 seats. 8 items on the menu, every one of them right. By the time Amara was 30, there were 6 locations. By 32, 9. Grant Whitmore arrived in year 2, Balak. Thursday evening, table 4, a man who ate in silence for 20 minutes before looking up at the passing chef and asking what was in the broth. She told him everything her grandmother wasn't willing to throw away. He came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. Within 14 months, his family's investment group had a seat on the board. Within 3 years, that seat had multiplied. Eleanor Whitmore, Grant's mother, 61, composure worn like a second skin, began attending quarterly reviews no one had invited her to. Her nephew Colton arrived in procurement at 27 with a title he had not earned and a confidence borrowed against a future he had not yet built. The invoices they generated were small at first, a few $1,000s routed through a supplier. Amara had never contracted. Easy to miss if you weren't the kind of person who checked. Amara was exactly that kind of person. She filed it away, said nothing. Bandily, she had learned early that the moment you speak before you're certain, people simply get better at hiding. People simply get better at hiding. But before invoices, before the suspicion, before invoices, before the 14 months that would follow. Sighed. There was a decision she had made alone, in silence, that no one in that boardroom would ever know about unless she chose to tell them. 5 years earlier, a financing deal collapsed 3 weeks before the 5th location was due to open. 41 employees were counting on that opening. Amara had 2 choices: walk away from 4 years of work or find money no one knew she had. Her grandmother's brownstone on South Calumet Avenue. Yellow front door. A cracked porch tile shaped like the bend of a river. The pull-out sofa where Amara had slept every summer until she was 12. She sold it quietly, without telling a single person, and used the proceeds to hold the company together until the next capital draw came through. She told Grant the money came from an outside investor. She let him believe it. She had not wanted him to see her as a woman who needed saving. The house was gone. The company was standing. For 5 years, she told herself that was the right trade. She was still deciding. 14 months before the evening on Halsted Street, a Friday night, everyone had gone home. Amara sat alone in her office on the 7th floor of the Marrow and Oak headquarters building, sitting on West Randolph, a cold cup of coffee to her left, and a stack of quarterly procurement reports spread across the desk. She had developed a habit in recent years of reading every line of every supplier invoice herself. A habit Grant had once called obsessive, and she had simply called knowing what you own. The third report stopped her. A consulting invoice for $2,047. Vendor name, Creston Advisory Group, LLC. Services rendered brand strategy consultation, Q3, no deliverable attached. No internal sign-off beyond Colton's initials. She pulled up the Illinois Secretary of State Business Registry on her laptop. Creston Advisory Group, LLC. Registered address, 1114 Sheridan Road, Wilmette, Illinois. Eleanor Whitmore's home address. Amara set the report down on the desk. She did not move for a moment. Not rage. Something quieter and heavier. The particular weight of a slow leak in a roof you spent years building, finally making itself visible. She picked up her phone. Called Denise Okafor. Her chief accountant, 44 years old, 17 years in financial management. The only person in that building. Who knew the real cost of keeping Marrow and Oak standing since the beginning. Denise, I need you to start keeping a separate record. Everything dated. Every invoice cross-referenced against actual deliverables. Backed up in 2 places, nothing on the company server. Denise did not ask why. There was a pause. The pause of a woman already suspicious of the same things, but waiting for someone with authority to say it first. I'll need a new notebook, she said. Get 2. The notebooks Denise chose were Lushed Term 1917 hardcover, ocean blue. Her handwriting was small and precise, the kind that accountants develop over years of meaning, every digit. Those notebooks would not look like evidence. They would look like what they were, the records of a careful woman who simply refused to let things disappear. 1 year before all of it, different side of the same city. But a Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind of sharp, cloudless Chicago afternoon that makes the city look like a photograph of itself. A boy wandered into a noodle shop on Halsted Street, following a friend who lived in the neighborhood, got separated at the intersection, smelled something extraordinary coming through a cracked door, and walked in. He was 7 years old. He looked around the room, spotted the chess set at the corner table, and sat down across from the only person in the shop who wasn't talking. Can I beat you? Micah Bennett asked. Kang Tae-hyun looked up from his bowl. He studied the boy the way he studied most things, completely without expression. Then he turned the board around. They played 3 games that afternoon. Tae-hyun won the first 2 without effort. The third game ran 41 minutes. Micah took his queen on move 19 with a rook sacrifice that shouldn't have worked and did. Tae-hyun lost. He sat with that for a moment. The specific, unfamiliar texture of being surprised by something. Then he refilled Micah's glass of water without being asked. The boy ate a full bowl of tteokbokki and talked about his mother the way children do. When they love someone completely and assume the whole world is equally interested. She forgot to eat when she was busy. She made the best rice in Chicago. She smelled like cardamom in the mornings. So he said it all in the same flat, factual tone, the way children report things they consider simply true. Tae-hyun listened to every word. His sister Jisoo had spoken about him the same way once. To strangers, to neighbors, to anyone who would listen, her brother was the one who kept the lights on, who always came back, who would always come back. She had believed it completely. He had been 3 days too late. He did not move from the table. after Micah left. He sat with the chessboard the way it was, the rook still on the square where Micah had played the move that cost him the game. He did not reset the pieces. He left them exactly where the boy had left them. The following Tuesday, Micah came back. Taehyun had the board set up exactly as it was, waiting. The Tuesday after that, Amara came to collect her son. She stood outside the glass door, knocked once, didn't come in. When Micah waved, she looked through the glass at Taehyun. One brief, level look. Not warm, not unfriendly. Simply the look of a woman who assessed things quickly and trusted slowly. She nodded once, turned and walked away. Taehyun watched them reach the end of the block before he looked back down at the board. The following Tuesday, there was a second bowl of tteokbokki on the table when they arrived, placed there before either of them had walked in the door. Micah ate it without comment, as if it had always been there. Amara was running late that evening. She walked in just after 7, still in her chef's whites, and found the bowl sitting at the empty end of the table. She looked at it, looked at Tai, looked at Taehyun. He was watching the board. She sat down and ate without saying a word to him. When she finished, she stood, helped Micah pack his pieces, and left. She did not say thank you. He did not say you're welcome. Neither of them said anything at all. And somehow, that was the most honest exchange either of them had managed with another person in longer than they could each remember. What Amara did not know, what she had no reason to suspect on any of those Tuesday evenings, was that the man who quietly placed a second bowl on the table held the lease to every single one of her 9 restaurant locations. That his company, Heseong Holdings, had been the silent landlord since year 3. That he had watched the Whitmore family's internal communications with the cold, methodical patience of someone who had learned the hardest possible way what happens when you arrive 3 days too late. And that he had already decided he would not be late again. The Marrow Room opened on the 4th floor of the Intercontinental Chicago on a Thursday evening in November. 431 guests, 12 journalists from food and culture publications, 3 camera crews from local television affiliates. A menu that Amara had spent 11 weeks writing, revising, and rewriting again. Each dish a conversation between the cooking she had grown up watching and the technique she had spent a decade learning to trust. The centerpiece dessert was her grandmother's bread pudding, elevated in presentation but untouched in its soul. She had tested that recipe 47 times over the previous 3 months until the first bite landed exactly the way she needed it to land. Like something remembered, not discovered. By 7:31 p.m., the room was full and warm and loud in the specific way a successful opening feels. Not chaos, but velocity. Amara was in the kitchen, tears, still in her chef's whites, hair pinned back, moving between stations with the particular focus that descends on her when a service is running well and the only thing that exists is the work. She had not yet changed into the dress hanging on the hook behind her office door. She told herself she would change after the first wave of entrees went out. She did not change. At 7:49 p.m., someone on the floor came to the kitchen door and said Grant was asking for her. She handed off to her sous chef, wiped her hands, and walked out. Was already at the front of the room. Grant was already at the microphone at the front of the room, standing in the warm amber glow of the event lighting, the kind of light that makes everyone look like the best version of themselves. He was in a charcoal suit she hadn't seen before. He smiled at her when she appeared at the edge of the crowd, the open, easy smile she had once believed was his truest face. Tonight marks not just the opening of our 9th location, he said, but the beginning of a new chapter for Marrow and Oak hospitality. As we scale into the next phase, we're formalizing a leadership structure that reflects where this company is going. He paused. Let the room lean in. Effective tonight, Colton Whitmore assumes the role of Chief Operating Officer, overseeing daily operations across all 9 locations. Colton raised a glass from a table near the front. 27 years old, cufflinks, a smile that had never once been earned. Amara stood at the edge of the crowd and listened to Grant outline a restructuring she had never been consulted about, in a room she had filled, at a dinner she had cooked. Her name appeared once in his remarks, in the past tense in a sentence about foundational contributions to the brand's early identity. At 8:04 p.m., she reached for her access card to re-enter the kitchen. The reader blinked red. She looked at it for one full second. Then she understood. Eleanor appeared at her shoulder the way Eleanor always appeared, without warning, without announcement, as if she had simply materialized from the ambient air of any room she decided to occupy. "Don't make a scene, sweetheart," she said quietly. Not unkind, almost tender. Uh, the particular tenderness of someone delivering a verdict they consider a mercy. You were the kitchen, this family is the name. There's no version of that equation where the kitchen wins. Amara looked at her. She picked up a champagne glass from the tray of a passing server, held it for exactly the length of time it takes to understand something completely. Then she set it down on the nearest table. Slowly. The stem touched the linen without a sound. A single drop of champagne rolled over the rim and spread into the white cloth. A small golden stain blooming outward in silence, while 400 people talked and laughed and clinked glasses 3 feet away. Nobody saw it. Nobody saw her walk to the coat check, collect her bag, and push through the side exit onto Ontario Street.
Yeah.
Nobody saw anything at all. Micah was at home with his babysitter. Amara had told him she would be back by 10. At 8:17 p.m., while his mother was sitting in the driver's seat of her car in the parking structure on North St. Clair, engine off, hands on the wheel, the particular stillness of someone who has decided not to move yet but hasn't decided anything else. Her son picked up his tablet and sent a message. Not to her. He knew she was at something important. He didn't want to interrupt. He messaged Taehoon instead. Hichu. Humne chu kakwer kong? The message arrived the way Micah's messages always arrived, without capitals, without punctuation, completely sincere. Taehoon read it in the kitchen of the noodle shop, alone, the last of the prep-up work done, and the front door locked. He looked at the message for a moment. Then he called Micah back. The boy answered on the second ring. His voice was easy, unbothered. He didn't know yet. He said his mom was at a big dinner for the new restaurant. He said the babysitter let him stay up until 9. He said he had almost figured out the chess problem Taehoon had texted him last week. Taehoon said goodnight. He hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Then he called Amara. She picked up on the fourth ring. She said nothing. He said nothing. The line stayed open. Alec. On her end, the low concrete silence of a parking structure, the distant compression of city traffic filtering through the walls, the sound of her own breathing, careful, controlled, the breathing of someone who has decided not to cry in a parking garage and is keeping that promise to herself by a very small margin. On his end, the settled quiet of a closed restaurant after the last customer has gone, a refrigeration unit cycling on and off, the faint sound of wind against the glass at the front of the shop. 4 minutes, 11 seconds. Then Amara said, very quietly, "I'm fine." She ended the call. Taehoon put on his coat. He drove east on Ontario, turned onto St. Clair, and pulled into the parking structure. Level 3. He found her car by the brake lights. She hadn't moved, engine still off. He pulled into the space 2 spots to her left, cut his engine, and sat. He did not call again, did not text, did not walk over and knock on her window. He simply sat. 14 minutes later, her headlights came on. Said Alec. The engine turned over. She backed out slowly and drove toward the exit ramp, passing directly in front of his car. And for the length of that single moment, her taillights washed across his windshield in 2 long stripes of red. Then she was gone. He sat in the dark for a while after that, not moving, not thinking about anything in particular, just aware of the specific feeling of having arrived somewhere, on time. It was not a feeling he had been on speaking terms with for several years. He drove home. The following morning, Micah woke up to a message on his tablet, a photograph. The chessboard at the corner table, taken from above, slightly crooked the way photographs taken without thinking are crooked. The rook had moved. Below the photo, one line, "Your turn." Micah studied it for 4 minutes over breakfast, oblivious to the fact that his mother had been sitting at the kitchen table for 2 hours, that she had not slept, and that her phone had rung at 6:23 in the morning with a call from Denise Okafor, whose voice was when Amara answered, was the specific voice of a woman who has found something she was not looking for and has spent the night deciding whether to say it out loud. "Amara," Denise said, "I found the name of the silent investor, the one from 5 years ago, the one who holds all 9 leases." She paused. "His name is Kang Tae-hyun, and he has known about us for a very long time." Denise did not exaggerate things. In 17 years of working with numbers, she had developed the particular discipline of people who understand that the most dangerous thing a figure can do is be made to sound like more than it is. When she called at 6:23 in the morning, with a voice that careful and that quiet, Amara understood before the second sentence that what she was about to hear was not speculation. Heseong Holdings, registered in Delaware, operating address in Chicago's West Loop. Silent landlord on all 9 Marrow and Oak locations since year 3. Lease agreement structured with a clause requiring landlord written approval for any change in majority ownership. A clause so standard in commercial real estate that no one on the Whitmore legal team had flagged it as significant. Why would they? They had never bothered to find out who was actually on the other side of it. The registered principal of Heseong Holdings. Kang Tae-hyun? Amara listened to all of it without interrupting. When Denise finished, she thanked her. She said she would call back within the hour. She hung up and set the phone face down on the kitchen counter. She stood there for a while. She had just spent 14 months watching her husband hide things behind a smile that never quite reached his eyes. She had watched his mother use the word family the way a locksmith uses a key, precisely, deliberately, to open things that weren't hers. And now the man who had been sitting across from her son every Tuesday for a year, the man in whose car she had sat on the other end of an open phone line at 8:17 on the worst evening of her professional life, that man had known, had watched, had said nothing. She did not call him. She turned her phone face down and left it on the counter and went to wake Micah for school. He arrived at her door that evening at 7:42. No warning, no message. Just a knock, 3 times, unhurried. The knock of someone who has decided to be somewhere and is prepared to wait as long as that requires. Amara looked through the peephole, stood there with her hand on the deadbolt for 4 full seconds. Then she unlocked the door and walked back into the kitchen without opening it all the way, leaving it for whoever was on the other side. Micah opened a side. He looked up at Tae-hyun, looked back into the apartment toward the kitchen, where his mother had disappeared. Looked at Tae-hyun again with the particular calm of a 7-year-old who has absorbed more of the last 48 hours than anyone gave him credit for. "Come in," he said. "Mom forgets to eat when she's sad." He stepped back to make room. Tae-hyun stood at the threshold. The light from inside the apartment fell warm and yellow across the door frame. The kind of light that belongs to kitchens and to evenings when someone has been cooking, not for guests but for themselves. November wind pressed against his back. From somewhere, down the hallway, Micah had already disappeared. Back to his room or to the couch or to whatever 7-year-olds do when they have decided that 2 adults need to be left alone without making it obvious yet that's what they're doing. Tae-hyun stood at the edge of what was inside and what was outside. He stood there long enough for the decision to have weight. Then he stepped in and closed the door behind him. Amara was at the counter, not cooking, just standing at the counter with both hands flat on the surface, looking down at nothing. She heard him come in. She did not turn around. "How long have you known?" Her voice was even. That particular evenness that is not calm, but its opposite. The voice of someone who has already felt the thing fully and is now simply on the other side of it, standing in the wreckage with both feet planted. Since the third Tuesday, he said, Micah had a Marrow and Oak logo on his backpack. I'm the landlord. I knew what was happening in the boardroom. And you didn't say anything. No. She was quiet for a moment. Why? It was not quite a question. It was the word stripped of everything except its meaning. He was quiet for one breath, not the quiet of someone avoiding the truth, but of someone making sure the truth they give is the right one. Because if I told you before you had enough documentation, you would have moved too early. And they would have covered it. I learned what happens when you move 3 days too late, and I learned what happens when you move before you're ready. Neither one ends the way it should. The refrigerator hummed. Down the hall, the small sound of Micah turning a page. You should have told me, Amara said. Yes, he said, I should have. He did not follow it with an explanation, did not qualify it or soften it, or build a case around it. Just let it stand there, true and insufficient and honest, the way an apology is only worth anything, when it doesn't ask for anything in return. Amara pushed off from the counter and walked into the kitchen. He sat down at the table. 11 minutes passed. Tae-hyun sat without moving. He did not look at his phone, did not look around the apartment. What Alec out? He looked at the table in front of him. A small round table with 4 chairs, a chess set pushed to one side, a drawing Micah had left half-finished near the edge. He waited the way he had learned to wait, without needing the waiting to mean something, without calculating what came next. Amara came back out of the kitchen. She set a cup of coffee in front of him. Not her own cup, a second cup, made for him specifically. She did not say anything, did not meet his eyes, set it down, straightened up and walked to the chair at the far end of the table. Sat down. Tae-hyun looked at the cup, steam rising in a thin, steady line. He looked at her. She was already looking at the table, at the half-finished drawing, at anything that was not him. He picked up the cup. Drank. It was the right temperature. It was made the way he took it. He had no memory of ever telling her how he took his coffee, and he did not ask about it now. Some things are observed rather than asked. Some people pay attention in ways they never announce. Neither of them spoke for a while. It was not a comfortable for a while. It was not a comfortable silence. But it was an honest one. And between two people who had both spent years surrounded by comfortable silences that were hiding something, honest was its own kind of relief. At 8:19, Amara went and got the ocean blue notebooks. At 8:23, Denise joined by video call, her own notebook open in front of her, reading lamp on behind her in the small home office where she had been working since 5 that morning. The 3 of them sat with the documents spread across the table until 1:07 in the morning. Denise, reading figures aloud, Amara cross-referencing against the original lease terms, Tae-hyun explaining the ownership structure and the precise legal mechanism by which the Whitmore family's transaction could not proceed without his signature. The explanation was not complicated once it was laid out plainly. That was the particular cruelty of what the Whitmore family had attempted. It was not sophisticated. It relied entirely on the assumption that no one would look closely enough, that Amara would be too busy running restaurants to read the fine print of her own foundation, that the silent landlord would remain silent. They had been wrong about both. Micah fell asleep on the couch at some point between 9:30 and 10. Nobody had noticed the exact moment. He had simply been there, sitting cross-legged watching the adults talk across the table. And then he was horizontal, a throw blanket pulled over his shoulder. That he must have done himself, one hand still loosely holding his king chess piece. At 10:47, between one sentence and the next, Tae-hyun stood up quietly, walked to the couch, lifted Micah without waking him, and carried him to his room. Amara looked up when she heard the bedroom door close softly. She looked back down at the notebook, said nothing. When he came back and sat down, she pushed the relevant page toward him without comment and pointed to a clause in the lease agreement she needed him to confirm. He confirmed it. They kept working. The narrator who tells this story has been asked, more than once, where the turning point was. People want a single moment, the tray of evidence, the forged signature, the vote. But the truth is quieter than that. The turning point was a cup of coffee made at the right temperature by a woman who was still angry and who made it anyway. It was a man who sat for 11 minutes without asking to be forgiven. As it was a child who said she forgets to eat when she's sad, 7 years old, already understanding that love is most visible not in what we say but in what we notice. Some things do not announce themselves. They just happen, in kitchen light, at a small round table, after midnight. By morning, Amara had sent one email to every member of the Marrow and Oak Board of Directors. Subject line: urgent meeting request. Documentation attached. The censor's address was hers. The second signature block at the bottom of the message belonged to Kong Tae-hyun, chairman, Hee Seong Holdings, majority leaseholder, preferred shareholder at 34.3%. It was the first time his name had appeared on any Marrow and Oak communication in 3 years of holding the ground beneath all 9 of its locations. The Whitmore family received the email at 6:51 a.m. By the time Eleanor called Grant, Grant had already called his attorney. By the time his attorney called back, the meeting had already been confirmed for following morning. 14th floor, the following morning, 14th floor, the boardroom with the windows that looked out over the Chicago River. There was nothing left to do but show up. The 14th floor boardroom had floor-to-ceiling windows on its north wall. On a clear morning, you could see the Chicago River from those windows. The particular steel gray of it in November, moving slow and flat between the bridges, indifferent to everything happening on either bank. Amara had always found that view steadying, too. The river did not care about quarterly reports or restructuring, announcements, or the difference between who built something and whose name was on the door. It just moved, every morning. The same direction, the same color, the same unhurried pace. She had stood at those windows many times over the years. She had never stood at them the way she was about to. The Whitmore family arrived at 9:53 a.m. Grant, in a navy suit, jaw set, phone gripped in his left hand. Not to use it, just to hold. Eleanor beside him, posture immaculate, the practiced composure of a woman who had walked into difficult rooms before and knew that the way you enter a room is the first argument you make. Colton. 2 steps behind. New glasses, the particular confidence of someone who has not yet understood that confidence borrowed against a future you haven't earned has an interest rate. They took their seats. They did not look uncertain. They had not yet learned to be. Amara came in at 10:01, worried. Denise walked beside her, the ocean blue notebook under one arm and a laptop bag over the other shoulder. Behind them, a woman neither Grant nor Eleanor recognized. Neutral expression, gray blazer, a document case held flat in both hands. A notarial attorney from a firm on South LaSalle Street that had nothing to do with anyone in that room. Amara sat down across from Grant. She did not look at Eleanor. She did not look at Colton. She set her hands flat on the table in front of her and looked at the center of the room, the way people look when they are not performing anything. Not confidence, not anger, not strength. Just presence. Grant opened his mouth. The door opened again. Kang Tae-han walked in without hurrying. He was not dressed for a boardroom in the way boardrooms usually mean. No tie, no display. Dark jacket, white shirt, the kind of quiet that fills a room the moment it enters. He nodded once to Amara, pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. For the first time, every person at that table understood they had been reading the wrong document. Grant looked at him. Who are you? Tae-hyun placed a single sheet of paper on the table and slid it to the center. Your landlord, he said. Denise opened her laptop. The screen on the north wall came to life. Layer 1, the evidence, side by side. Real supplier invoices against the procurement records that had been submitted to the board for 2 years. The delta was not subtle once it was laid out plainly. 41 transactions, 11 separate LLC entities, all traceable. Baldain mean. through Illinois Secretary of State filings, through registered agent addresses, through bank routing numbers Denise had spent 4 months cross-referencing back to the same cluster of addresses. 3 of them registered to Eleanor Whitmore's home on Sheridan Road in Wilmette. 2 to a property in Grant's name on North Astor Street. Total, all $2,847,339.17. Not embezzled in one motion, not dramatic, taken in amounts small enough to pass through quarterly review without triggering audit thresholds, which meant someone had known exactly what those thresholds were, which meant someone had been inside the financials long enough to learn them. Colton stopped adjusting his glasses somewhere around slide 4. Eleanor's composure did not crack, but it tightened, the way a thing tightens just before it does. Layer 2. The phone call. Tae-Yoon set his phone on the table, speaker on. He dialed a number from memory. 2 rings. A man's voice, clipped, professional, the voice of someone accustomed to conversations that move quickly. Tae-Hein? The Whitmore transaction, Tae-Hein said. It's off. A pause of exactly 1 second. Understood, Mr. Kang. We'll unwind our position. He ended the call, set the phone face down. The investment group had been positioned to acquire a controlling interest in Marrow and Oak Hospitality. The transaction the Whitmore family had structured the entire past 14 months to enable had just ceased to exist as a viable deal in the length of time it takes to say 11 words. Grant set his own phone down. He did not pick it back up. Layer 3, the notary. The attorney in the gray blazer opened her document case. She placed 2 items on the table. A certified forensic comparison of 47 Amara Bennett signature samples collected from public filings between 2019 and the present, and a copy of the brand trademark transfer document bearing the signature that had triggered the entire ownership restructuring. She did not editorialize. She simply stated what the analysis showed. The signature on the transfer document deviated from all 47 reference samples in pen pressure, letter spacing, and the specific angle at which Amara Bennett has always crossed the letter T in her last name. A deviation consistent across 3 independent measurements. Under Illinois law, that was forgery. She closed the document case and sat back. From across the table, the branch manager of the original Pilsen location, a woman named Cora, 12 years with the company, someone who had watched her hours get cut every time an Eleanor-adjacent budget review came through, stood up without being called on, without being asked, without anyone in that room having told her she could. Everything on that screen is accurate, she said. Her hands were not entirely steady. Her voice was. I've been watching this for 2 years. I just didn't know what to do with what I was seeing. She sat back down. The room did not make a sound. Grant spoke first. His voice had changed. The boardroom polish was gone, and what remained underneath was something more complicated and more human than anyone who had only ever seen him perform would have expected. He looked at Amara directly. Not at his attorney, not at his mother. At her. We built something, he said. Whatever happened, whatever my family did, we had something real. You know that. Amara looked at him for a long moment. She had known him for 7 years. She remembered the man who had sat at table 4 in the Pilson's location and gone quiet for 20 minutes over a bowl of broth. She remembered believing, for a long time, that the stillness in him was depth. She understood now that it had never been depth. It had been absence. Grant Whitmore had never learned how to want to be loved. He had only learned how to want to be undefeated. Somewhere between the Whitmore family name and the long shadow of Eleanor's expectations, winning had quietly replaced connecting as the thing that made him feel real. He was not lying when he said they'd had something. He simply could not tell the difference anymore between building something with her and being ahead of her. That confusion, she thought, was the saddest thing in the room. We did, she said quietly. You chose what to do with it. She looked back at the table. She was done. Eleanor spoke next. Softer now, smaller, the composure finally showing its seams. This is all over a few contracts, she said, almost to herself. A few contracts, and you're going to? Nobody answered her. The silence of 11 people who had just watched $2,847,339 be called. A few contracts was heavier than anything anyone in that room could have said in response. So nobody said anything. They let the words sit in the air where Eleanor had left them, and they let Eleanor hear what they sounded like. The board voted at 10:41 a.m. 11 minutes of deliberation. Colton Whitmore, contract terminated, effective immediately. Grant Whitmore, removed from the CEO position pending a full independent audit, referred to outside counsel regarding the forged trademark transfer document. Eleanor Whitmore and affiliated entities, barred from all Marrow and Oak premises pending legal resolution. Amara Bennett, confirmed as sole CEO and majority decision-maker, a title she had built every brick of and had never once officially held. The vote was not close. The room emptied in stages. Colton left without speaking, the new glasses slightly crooked now, the borrowed confidence entirely gone. Grant paused at the door, turned halfway, as if he might say something more. Then didn't. The door closed on his reflection in the polished steel of the door panel. A man she had spent 7 years building something with, very small in a room he had believed he owned. Eleanor was the last to leave. She gathered her things without rushing, the particular dignity of someone determined not to appear to be fleeing. At the door, she stopped, one hand on the frame, and looked back at the room. One final time. Said nothing. Left. Amara stood at the north windows. The river was still moving. Steel gray and unhurried, and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened on the 14th floor. She looked at it for a while and tried to locate the feeling she had expected to have. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction, or the clean release of something long overdue. What she found instead was simply tired, the specific tiredness that comes from carrying something heavy for a very long time, and finally, at this exact moment, setting it down. The room was empty except for Tae Hyun. He was still at the table, documents in a neat stack in front of him. He had not been asked to stay. No one had told him the meeting was over. No one had said anything to him at all. He was still there. Amara turned from the window. "You don't have to stay," she said. "I know," he said. He did not move. She looked at him for a moment. This man, who had sat in a parking garage 2 nights ago without being asked, who had carried her son to bed without announcement, who had arrived at her door at 7:42 in the evening and waited 11 minutes in silence for a cup of coffee he had not earned yet. She pulled out the chair next to him and sat down. Outside, the river kept moving. The room was quiet. The city continued below them. Indifferent and enormous and ongoing, the way cities are. And for the first time in 14 months, Amara Bennett sat inside that quiet without needing it to be anything other than what it was. 3 floors down in the lobby, a security guard later told Denise that Eleanor Whitmore had stood under the building awning for several minutes after leaving. Looking up at the Marrow and Oak signage above the entrance, the sign her daughter-in-law had chosen the font for, the color for, the exact height above the door. She stood there long enough that the guard had wondered if she needed help. Then she got into a car and did not look back. Denise did not tell Amara this story until much later. When she did, Amara sat with it for a moment. Did not feel satisfaction. Felt something closer to the particular grief of understanding at last that some people mistake control for love for so long that by the time the difference is made plain to them, they have forgotten which one they were actually looking for. She let herself feel that grief for exactly 1 breath. Then she went back to work. The civil settlement took 11 weeks and 3 days. Not a courtroom verdict, a negotiated resolution, the kind that happens in conference rooms between attorneys, when both sides have done the math and one side's math is considerably worse than the other's. The terms were not made public. They did not need to be. What mattered, in the end, was what was documented. The 2,847,339.17 in fraudulent procurement transactions, the forged trademark transfer, the unauthorized power of attorney bearing Amara's signature on a document she had never seen. Eleanor and Colton accepted civil liability. The criminal referral for the forgery was filed with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and processed the way these things are processed, slowly, without drama, with the particular grinding patience of institutions that do not move fast but do, eventually, move. Grant's name appeared in the referral as a person of interest, not a defendant. Not yet. That determination belonged to prosecutors and timelines and processes entirely outside of Amara's hands, which was exactly where she left it. She had learned over 14 months of quiet work that the most dangerous thing you can do with justice is try to control the shape it takes. In the weeks that followed, Amara did two things that appeared in no press release and generated no coverage. She promoted Denise Okafor to Chief Financial Officer, a title Denise had functionally held for 3 years while being paid as a senior accountant. What? The retroactive compensation adjustment that accompanied the promotion covered $47,200 in underpayment across those years, calculated to the dollar from Denise's own records. The Ocean Blue notebooks, it turned out, had been recording more than just fraudulent invoices. She also found the two branch managers whose hours had been systematically cut whenever an Eleanor-adjacent budget review came through, and she corrected their compensation retroactively. No announcement, no meeting, just revised payroll, effective the first of the month, with a handwritten note from Amara that said only, "You've been doing this work. You should have been paid for it." The press release she issued was 41 words long. Marrow and Oak Hospitality reaffirms its commitment to transparent and ethical leadership following an internal governance review. The company's founding vision, to build honestly, from what is real remains unchanged. That was all it needed to say. 3 months later, a Tuesday in February. Chicago in February is its own particular argument. The cold, not dramatic, but persistent. The kind that doesn't so much arrive as accumulate, day by day, until the city has simply accepted it as the current terms of living here. The sky was the flat pre-dawn gray of 5 light a.m. when Amara let herself into the Pilsen location on Blue Island Avenue. The circular outlines of washing machine drums were still visible in the floor tile. She had never filled them in. She liked the reminder of what the space had been before it became what it was, the way things carry their history in them whether you acknowledge it or not. This, she turned on the kitchen lights, put on an apron, and started the fire under the stock pot. No measurements, no recipe card, the way her grandmother had done it, the way her mother had watched, the way Amara had stood beside them both. At ages she could barely remember now, and absorb the lesson before she had words for what she was learning. An hour later, she tasted the broth from a wooden spoon. Her eyes closed, the kitchen quiet around her. It was right. She hadn't lost that. Whatever the last 14 months had taken, it had not taken that. That same Tuesday afternoon, Micah went to the noodle shop on Halsted Street after school. The chess set was at the corner table. The board was set up exactly as it had been the last time they had played. 3 months ago, the evening before the board meeting, when nobody had been thinking about chess. The rook was still on the square where Micah had left it. Taeyeon had not moved it. Micah sat down, studied the board for a long moment, and moved the rook. Taeyeon looked at the move, looked at the boy. "Took you long enough," he said. Micah shrugged. "I wanted to be sure." Taeyeon had something for Amara when she arrived to collect Micah that evening. A white envelope, unsealed, placed on the table beside the chessboard without ceremony. No label on the outside. He slid it toward her when she sat down, before she had taken her coat off, before either of them had said anything about anything. She opened it. A bank statement. An account she had never seen before, opened 14 months ago, the third Tuesday, after Micah had first walked into the noodle shop. A recurring transfer of $847 per month. 12 transfers total, $10,164 sitting untouched. She looked at the date of the first transfer, looked at the amount again, $847. She knew that number, 8/4/2017, the date on Micah's birth certificate, the number she had typed into more forms than she could count over 7 years. She set the statement down on the table. What is this? A savings account, he said. In his name. I can see that. Why? He was quiet for one beat. The particular quiet she had come to understand meant he was choosing the exact true thing rather than the easy one, because he deserved to have someone thinking about him even when no one asked them to. She looked at him. Why 847? He didn't answer that directly. She already knew. You didn't have to do this, she said. No. Then why? He looked at the chessboard, at the rook Micah had finally moved after 3 months. Because I had a sister, he said. Jisoo. She was 24. I knew something was wrong for 3 days before I did anything about it. I told myself I wasn't sure enough yet, that I needed to be certain before I moved. He stopped. Started again. I was certain by day 1. I was just afraid of being wrong about people I had trusted, and that fear cost me 3 days I can't have back. The refrigeration unit in the kitchen cycled on. Outside on Halsted Street, a bus passed in the early dark. Micah is not Jisoo, Amara said quietly. No, he said, but someone thinking about him when no one asked. That's the thing I couldn't do for her. I can do it for him. Amara looked at the statement for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out a pen and a small notepad, the kind she kept for writing down vendor names and menu ideas and things she didn't want to forget. She tore out a page, wrote 4 lines on it, slid it across the table. Kong Tae-hyun, Amara Bennett. Joint Educational Fund, Micah James Bennett. Monthly contribution, $847. Both parties in agreement. Term, until Micah decides what he wants to build. Effective. Today. She pushed the pen across with it. I don't accept gifts, she said. I accept partners. He read the page, read it again. Then he picked up the pen. For the second time in the same room, a document between them was signed. And this one, every letter of every signature, belonged entirely to the people whose names were on it. Micah lasted another 20 minutes before he asked the asked question. They were still at the corner table. The chess game finished, the board cleared, the last of the teokbokki gone. Amara had her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Taehyun was reading something on his phone. Micah was lying across his chair the way children occupy chairs, which is to say entirely wrong and completely comfortable. He asked without looking up, Mom, how come you're not mad at Dad? Amara set her cup down. She did not answer immediately, and she sat with the question the way the question deserved, not to find the right answer, but to find the true one. I was, she said. For a while, I was angry every morning before I even opened my eyes, and sad for longer than that. Micah looked at her now. But if I spent all my energy being angry at your dad, I wouldn't have anything left. Not for you, not for the restaurants, not for keeping the things that actually matter. She paused. Being angry at someone is like leaving all your lights on in an empty house. It costs you whether anyone's home or not. He thought about this with the focused seriousness he brought to chess problems. So you turned the lights off? I turned them off, she said, and put them somewhere else. He nodded slowly, the nod of someone filing something away for later, not fully understanding yet, but knowing he will. He looked at Taehyun. Do you get angry? Yes, Taehyun said, without looking up from his phone. What do you do with it? A pause. I play chess. Micah considered this. That's why you let me win sometimes? I have never let you win, Taehyun said. Micah grinned, the wide, uncomplicated grin of a 7-year-old who has just decided he believes the exact opposite of what he's been told, and turned back to the window. Later that evening, after Micah had fallen asleep in the back seat on the drive home, Amara pulled up in front of the noodle shop one more time. She didn't go in. Just sat in the car for a moment, engine running, looking through the glass at the corner table. The chess set, the 2 cups, the light inside warm and still, the same table where a boy had climbed into the empty chair 3 months ago and placed a single king on the wood between them. That chair was not empty anymore. It had not been empty for a long time. She understood now, not since the first Tuesday a 7-year-old had walked in without permission and made himself at home, across from the one person in Koreatown nobody else dared sit with. Micah had understood something, in the wordless way children understand things, that both adults had taken considerably longer to arrive at. That the empty chair was not a warning. It was an invitation. She put the car in drive. Behind her, through the rearview mirror, the neon sign above the shop door flickered once, the way it always did in the cold, and then held steady. There is a word in Korean, yomchi, that has no clean translation in English. It means something like dignity, but also conscience. The awareness of how you are being seen, and more importantly, how you are seeing yourself. It is the thing that makes a person behave the same way, whether anyone is watching or not. Amara Bennett did not know that word, but she had been living by it for 33 years. In a kitchen in Bronzeville at 5:31, in the morning, in a laundromat on Blue Island Avenue, that became 11 seats and 8 items, in 14 months of ocean blue notebooks and cold coffee, and a silence she carried alone because she believed that was what strength required. She was wrong about the silence part. Strength, it turned out, was not the absence of needing people. It was the wisdom to recognize which ones were worth the risk. A 7-year-old had figured that out in 3 games of chess. The 2 adults in his life had simply needed a little more time. Legacy is never the size of the company. It is not the number in the settlement, or the title on the door, or the name above the entrance. It is the version of yourself you can still recognize once everyone who claimed to love you has finished telling you who to be instead. Amara Bennett knew exactly who she was. She always had. If you or someone you love has ever had to rebuild something quietly, after someone you trusted tried to take it, this story was written for you. Amara, Taehyun, and Micah are fictional characters, but the experiences that shaped them, betrayal by per people who use the word family like a transaction, the loneliness of building a case in silence, the unexpected grace of someone who shows up without being asked. Those come from the truest parts of being human. I want to hear from you. What moment in this story stayed with you the longest? Was it the phone call in the parking garage? The cup of coffee that said everything without saying anything? The king standing alone on the table? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, not because I have to, but because the conversation in the comments of this channel has become something I genuinely look forward to. You bring your own stories into these stories, and that is what makes them matter. If this reached you, if something in Amara's patience, or Taehyun's particular kind of loyalty, or the way Micah understood what the adults were still learning, if any of it landed somewhere real for you, share it with one person who needs it today. Not for the algorithm, for them. Like this video if you stayed until the end. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And if you have a story of your own, about rebuilding, about trust, about the people who showed up when no one asked them to, tell me. This channel exists because of those stories. I'll see you in the next one.